From salaries and soaring butter prices, rent costs, and the cost of housing in New Zealand, we unpack the realities of what it is like to buy a first home in 2025.
Welcome to Checks and Balances, the takeover. I'm Michaela.
And I'm Jess.
And today we're talking about the realities of what it takes to save a 10% deposit for your first home.
That's right. You see a lot of content out there that says it's really difficult. There's also some out there saying it's super easy. So we want to break down what the reality is.
Yeah, I feel like I run into a lot of people around my same age and, they go, oh, I think maybe in like 5 years, I'm hoping I can buy my first home. And then I'm like, okay, well, how much do you have in your KiwiSaver? And they're like, oh, like $80,000. And I'm like, that's a lot of money. You can buy your first home now.
Today.
And we did this with Jess when she joined us, was peer pressured you into buying your first home immediately.
Yep. We came back from London and I thought it was a little while away to get a deposit together, but turns out we did it in the space of 3 or 4 weeks. I bought a house. So, yep. Yeah, exactly. I was definitely in that boat. And I think unless you have people around you who know the ins and outs, it makes it really hard to know. So we want to break it down for you today. We're going to look at 2 average couples, one in Auckland and one in Christchurch, because a lot of our listeners are from Auckland, but as we all know, buying in Auckland is a bit of a different beast. So we want to see how that compares to our other main centre in Christchurch.
Okay, but before we get into the actual case studies themselves, we just want to talk a little bit about what the average Kiwi's financial position looks like, because we're trying to look at this from the perspective of the average Kiwi in that maybe 20 to 40 age range. Yeah. And not the person that's gotten hundreds of thousands from the bank of mom and dad or won the lotto. We're talking about real people with average incomes.
Totally. Yep. So the average Kiwi in their early 30s earns around $70,000 a year before tax, which, if you factor in things like rent and groceries and everything else, may not feel like a lot. So we're trying to put this into perspective in terms of a really well broken down budget to see what it might take for you to buy your first home on a salary like this. Obviously, before your early 30s, if we're looking at the weekly income sort of in your 20s, it's a little bit lower because you're less experienced, you're starting out your career, and that sits closer to $52,000 a year actually in your 20s.
So if we have a couple in their 30s, we assume they're each earning $70,000 a year, which is the rough average income for that age group. Mm-hmm. We're looking at a total household net income of $105,000.
That's right. Yep. And that's including KiwiSaver going up to 4% because as we all know, those are going to be the rules.
Mm-hmm. Up to 4%. So roughly we've got $8,800 a month net in total income on 2 people, $70K each. Mm-hmm. And of that, actually $3,000 roughly is probably going to your rent cost.
That sounds like a lot, doesn't it? If you think about it on a monthly basis. But that average rent that we've used for Auckland is between $650 and $690 a week, which maybe we had a good deal, but we had an apartment for $600, which was a little 2-bed new build apartment.
How long ago was that?
Only a year ago.
Oh, okay. I thought you were talking about before.
No, only a year ago. So, obviously varies, but this is on average. So, on average, if a couple got a little 2-bed type unit.
And obviously, if you have flatmates and all that jazz, it can come down. But we just want to focus on kind of what you would be paying as couples on your own. And then obviously, we have to talk about the cost of living in general as well. It's obviously quite high at the minute.
Food inflation has increased by 4.4% even just over the past year. Have you seen the price of butter lately? Can we talk about the butter?
I have to confess, I actually don't do the grocery shopping in my house.
Just David.
He does it because he gets off at work at 2 p.m. So it's much easier.
It's a good time to go. Yeah.
But that means the odd times I do go, it's once every few months, and I get absolutely shocked by the price of a grocery shop every time I do go. I'm just what?
And the person that doesn't go is always not necessarily in our household, but definitely I hear it a lot. The person who doesn't do the grocery shop is how is it costing that much? Yeah. And it's well, you go do it.
When we do go together, we do the whole what do you think the total would be? What do you think the total would be? And I'm always way under what it is. And then at the end, I'm holding the receipt.
You're out of touch. The other one I saw probably it was a year ago was olive oil. Olive oil doubled. Now for just a bottle of Pam's olive oil was $20. If you can get
Whoa.
it. That's if you can get it.
Okay,
And
that's a bit shocking.
butter is outrageous. So that's had a 65% jump in the last 12 months. And it's so funny because I feel like with groceries, you know, you have milk and eggs and bread and butter. It's like stuff that you just would you just take for granted. That's like your basics, right?
Mhm.
And now I'm using butter and I'm like really conscious of how much butter I'm using. Which is because it's like
tough times out here.
Oh my gosh, it's $10 a block. It's ridiculous.
That is quite ridiculous.
Mm.
Did you have to cut out butter when you were looking at saving a deposit for your first home?
I didn't. And I think that's the point that we want to get to today is, yes, the cost of living has gone up. Yes, we see a lot of dialogue about being difficult and near impossible to save for a first home, but actually the average person can do it. It just takes a little bit of forethought and planning ahead.
And I think education as well, because like I said, there's a lot of people that will be listening to this and they will have the KiwiSaver balance to make it work. And they just don't know that it's possible.
For sure, yeah. I sort of feel like for me, when we were saving for a house, it happened by accident, which actually just came about because I started working here and had the conversation with you guys about what was possible to borrow and what we had in KiwiSaver. So in saying that everybody should plan ahead, we had just been saving while in the UK. And we came back, we had our wedding, we paid for that, and we had a little bit left over plus our KiwiSaver, and that was our first home deposit. Yeah. So, you know, it's maybe easier than people think, but you don't know unless you talk to somebody about it.
Yeah. For us as well, it was, you know, David had been contributing 10% to his KiwiSaver for about 10 years when we got together. And so when we looked at purchasing a house, like he had a pretty good amount in his KiwiSaver. So we actually didn't have to save any additional, which is like pretty good point here. The KiwiSaver is key.
And I think the actual crunch time wasn't saving for the house. It was after we bought the house.
Yes.
And because we first fixed on 7% interest rates. And so that first year, they've come down now and everything's like feeling way better. But that first year was like, oh, this is a different cash flow. Looks really different when you're renting and have all this excess to save versus when you're actually got a mortgage to pay. That's when it felt tighter. And I can't say, I don't feel like we've sacrificed buying butter and stuff. We're still definitely doing a lot of it. We're probably not going on as many holidays that first year of our mortgage. So yeah, there's some sacrifices to be made, but it wasn't necessarily in saving for the deposit. Does that make sense?
I think it was like same for me. The deposit was fine. It just kind of already existed.
Yeah.
But that first year of mortgage payments was really tight. So I think that's also something you need to think about. And also like if you're going from, you know, a flat you share with people to your own home, there's costs involved with like furnishing and moving and all these other things. So it's not even just the home deposit, but you also want to think about that little bit extra for actually getting situated.
Yeah, for sure. While we're on the topic of how hard it is to save the deposit though, there are some government schemes, obviously RIP, the first home grant, no longer around. I told my friend this the other day. She didn't know. She was heartbroken. So for those of you that don't know, that doesn't exist anymore. But there are government schemes that are out there to help you into a first home. Could you tell us about those?
Yeah, so we do have the first home loan. That's what's left for first home buyers to use. And that is essentially a scenario where you only need a 5% deposit. And it's underwritten by Kāinga Ora and gone through certain banks where it allows them to lend outside of their usual scope. So usually they'd cap out at maybe a 90% loan to value ratio. But on this, you can go to 95 in some scenarios.
So where's the extra 5% coming from?
Yeah, so in this case, you would be borrowing 95% of the home value from the bank and then using your own cash or your KiwiSaver as the 5% deposit.
Got it. So what are the downsides of doing that?
Yeah, so you have to be mindful of you're going to get charged a lot more interest if you take out any kind of high LVR lending. So just be mindful that the rates you see online will probably not be the rates you're charged because they will tack an extra little bit on there for borrowing more.
Got it.
But it does allow you to get into the market a lot sooner than it would if you waited till you had 20% deposit.
Yeah.
There's also some fees you have to be aware of. So there is the first home loan insurance premium. So this is something you have to pay in order to make sure that, the bank is kind of insured against the fact that they've taken out an extra risk on lending you heaps of money, 95%. This is a 1.2% of the loan balance.
Oh.
So it used to actually be 0.5% of the loan balance. And the reason it was much lower up until actually 1st of July, so this just recently, was because the government was covering the difference. So the fee was actually 1.2%, but the government was covering a portion. So the homeowner was only liable for the 0.5.
Right.
Now you have to pay the whole 1.2% yourself.
Okay. So not only do you have a bigger mortgage with higher interest rates, you've also got this extra insurance on top. So while getting your first home and getting onto the property ladder is a priority and could be worth doing, it's also probably worth talking to somebody about if all those costs are manageable
like if
for
you're
you.
using one of these government grants, just be aware of the costs associated and what it means for you. And there's heaps of resources on the Kaingora website that tells you about how it works and who you can get in touch with to answer those questions.
Perfect. Shall we get into the case studies after the break?
Absolutely.
If you're thinking about buying your first home but you don't know where to start, talk to our mortgage team at Lighthouse. They'll be able to walk you through every step and tell you how much deposit you actually need. Now back to the show.
All right, let's get into these actual case studies and actually see what you need to be saving depending on where you're living.
Perfect. Okay, first of all, we're looking at a couple who are 22. We've got a marketing coordinator and a software developer aiming to buy a 2-bed townhouse in Auckland that's pretty close to town.
Income-wise, the combined net income averages $125,000 a year. We've averaged that over 6 years because they're kind of in the early earning stages of their career.
They're moving from graduates through to more experienced salaries, so we've factored all of that in. Next bit is KiwiSaver, so obviously a pretty important one. Everybody's probably well aware of the rules that it's going up to 3.5% and then 4%. So we've just based everything on 4% contribution. So we've got 8% total coming from employee and employer into their KiwiSavers, which is fantastic.
So that means the estimated balance after these 6 years is about $72,000 in their KiwiSavers combined.
Now, the house that we're looking at, we've assumed an $800,000 townhouse. Now, you can definitely get townhouses for cheaper than that,
you
but
definitely can.
Let's be generous and account for maybe some capital gain between now and 6 years, right?
Sure. And they want to be close to town, and the closer you get to fun stuff, the more expensive the house is.
That's right. So they need a 10% deposit to get into this house without that first home loan from the government. So we're looking at $80,000 as the deposit needed.
All right. So we also have to think about their living costs, obviously. So we're assuming average living costs $65,000 a year, which leaves a surplus of $60,000 a year to go towards savings and other expenses.
And I can definitely say from like the financial planning that I do, $65,000 a year is on the lower side, but certainly I feel like if you had a goal in mind, very achievable as well, especially for a couple. Like once you're talking families, once you're adding kids in, this would I'd be looking at least 80 probably.
Right.
But $65,000 a year for a couple is doable for sure.
So no avocados and no coffee.
No, you can definitely have avocados and coffee on that for sure.
Okay, so we've got a bit of a deposit gap because we're looking at a 10% deposit on an $800,000 townhome. And if we're looking at what we think they have in their KiwiSavers, there's a bit of room to make up. So we need about $8,000 of cash in order to buy.
That's right. And so if we're looking across the 6-year period with KiwiSaver savings, it will only take them actually 4 months once they've decided to buy the house to save this cash top up based on their surplus. I think it's important to say that you don't want just the deposit. You probably want a little bit more breathing room, right? Mm-hmm. For like lawyers' fees, like you said, furniture and things like that. So maybe they push it out to 8 months. So they've got a little bit more of a buffer. But this is pretty fantastic. Like people in their 20s earning an average income, those expenses that we've worked out are all based on average rent in Auckland and average cost for groceries. They could decide to buy a house and 8 months later be well on their way.
Mm-hmm. And I think what I do want to point out is in these scenarios, we have assumed no personal debt for any of these people.
True.
So if you're in a situation where you do carry a bit of personal debt, obviously you need to account for that and maybe you're saving a little bit less. But having personal debt shouldn't hinder you from looking to buy a first home. Like it's not back how it was a few years ago where you had to shut down literally everything in order for the bank to be happy with your position, you can still get a mortgage and have a credit card.
Right.
Not saying you should get a credit card, but
but you could. I think the point for these people is that, without a whole lot of focus and effort, perhaps maybe aside from managing expenses and personal debt, over 6 years, they can more or less mindlessly end up in a position where they can buy a home, right?
Like you.
Like I did.
Mindlessly.
Very close to that. So now let's move through to Christchurch, because we know Auckland seems to be sort of the harder of the two with house prices the way they are. So is it easier for those in Christchurch?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so Christchurch, we've got the same thing, couple age 22, this time a teacher and an architectural technician.
Mm-hmm.
These are very specific. Did you choose these?
I did.
Okay, same thing, 2-bedroom townhouse near town, but in Christchurch this time.
Mm-hmm. So their combined net income averages $112,000 a year over 6 years. So a little bit lower than Auckland, which is what we would expect.
KiwiSaver, again, the total 8% contribution employee and employer. So estimated balances over 6 years this time around is again a little bit lower at $66,000 combined.
Right. And again, the price of the home is a little bit lower than Auckland too. A townhouse for around $650,000 with the deposit needed at $65,000.
That's really, I feel like $65,000 sounds a lot more achievable to me than the $80,000, even though it's not that big of a difference.
Yeah,
but like
and it's relative to income.
It makes sense. Okay, so the living costs also a bit lower again, $54,200 a year. So we've got a surplus of $58,000 a year on the living costs.
Yeah, those living costs do feel low, but then again, I guess rent's lower.
Rent's lower. I mean, I have been to Christchurch. It is a fun place, but maybe you're not doing as much as you would be in Auckland.
Arguably more vibey than Auckland, though, their little Riverside Market.
Riverside Market is a vibe.
It is. I will say, though, my mum and stepdad came up to Auckland and went to Sylvia Park, where we do our shopping at Pack and Save, and they were like, everything is $1 more.
Oh.
I know.
That's interesting.
I know. Like, not all of them are equal, and they live in Wanaka.
Interesting.
And they don't shop at Pack and Save. So I know. So obviously things like the groceries must be also cheaper, and on average they are cheaper down in Christchurch too.
I know. About that.
Right?
So this time around, we actually don't have a deposit gap. So if they wanted to just go with the 10% deposit needed on the $650,000 townhome, they could just use what is in their KiwiSaver.
Yeah, amazing. So they might want to save up a little bit more cash, like we said, before they pull the trigger. But over a 6-year period, this has been achieved by this couple with an average budget in Christchurch.
Yeah, and I think, again, this is the main point. You actually don't have to do much. And a lot of people listening are probably closer than they think just with their KiwiSaver balance.
Agreed. I think, when I then ran these scenarios, well, like, what if we want to happen sooner? Like, what if somebody, because we do have clients that come through, some are single, and we've done an episode on how to get ahead when you're single, if you want to go check that out. Some people who are single, who are not earning crazy salaries, who have achieved buying their first home on their own in their early 20s, right? Like, we've seen these people come through our doors. So, if you wanted to do this sooner than 6 years, if it's a real focus and goal of yours in your 20s, you can definitely do it in a shorter timeline. I ran some scenarios where each couple did it in 4 years. It required a slightly tighter budget, but definitely nothing outrageous.
And I think also, there might be some people out there, like me, when I moved here, I didn't have a KiwiSaver. I'm obviously not from New Zealand. Or maybe people that have used their KiwiSaver for something else previously, like a personal emergency, and you kind of feel like you're starting from scratch. You can still get there. Maybe it requires a little bit of extra guidance from professionals or the help of, friends and family. But I think my whole key takeaway from this is I hear a lot of people thinking, it's impossible. I can't do it. There's no way. So why would I even bother?
Yes.
You should still bother.
Both couples can realistically buy a home within 4 years if they're putting a little bit of extra away into savings outside of their KiwiSaver. So what we're saying is it just takes a little bit of forethought and conscious decision making around what's important to you, what your goals are, but it is achievable. Don't fall back into doom spending, which a lot of our Gen Zs are sort of doing.
Yes.
It is achievable. And if you want to talk to somebody about all of this, remember, we are here to help. Thank you so much to Lighthouse Financial for sponsoring this episode. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.